Originally, this video was supposed to be about Dexter, as I was watching Resurrection and wanted to talk about how much I love that series. Dexter himself is a character I find really intriguing, and Michael C. Hall plays the role extremely well. So, as someone who gets pretty obsessed with things they find interesting, I obviously wanted to see Michael in some other roles. So, before the final episode of Resurrection aired, I started 6 Feet Under. It was a show that I didn't hear too much about. The only conversations that I saw about it were in comment sections where people compared characters from the show to characters in Dexter. So other than the character that Michael plays being a homosexual, and unfortunately a small fragment of the ending, I walked into it pretty blind. I'm happy that I did though, because I think I watched one of the greatest shows to ever exist. 6 Feet Under follows the journey of the Fisher family after the unfortunate passing of the father of the family, Nathaniel Sr. Each season tells a different story, and they're structured completely differently too. Each episode starts with its own death scene that usually relates to the Fisher story in the episode, directly or indirectly. Season 1 has this feeling of dream chasing, where we want the Fishers to succeed in the funeral servicing business. We root for their success and their graces, hoping that they don't face defeat at the hands of big corps buying their business out for the sake of profit, instead of being genuine counsel for those who suffer the loss of loved ones. I see season 1 as an exposition of individual characters. We see who they are throughout the entirety of the season. We see what behaviors they continuously commit, even if the context is different in each episode. We see the good in each character, but we also see the bad. We learn what the characters do when they're stressed, what they do when they're happy, what they do when their backs are against the wall, and what they do when they have some time to think. The pilot episode is really engaging, but I also think it's a great season 1 overall. The character flaws are really deep, but there's also intention and dedication to grow. Season 2 ignites the relationship between the characters, and this is where we see how the characters begin to realize a lot of different things about themselves within the relationships they hold. I think this season is where you really see how human the characters are, and it's a lot different from the first season because we are no longer being introduced to these characters and instead are now used to seeing them. We can predict what's going to happen because we've seen the characters grovel through tough times and good times. They make decisions that humans would make given the context they're in, not decisions that a character in a TV show would make. They are true to the imperfections of humanity and true to their personalities more importantly. Anyways, the decisions that they make are human ones. It may not be ones that benefit themselves, or it may be decisions that selfishly benefit themselves, or decisions that put them in harm's way or puts another in harm's way. But again, they are decisions that these people would make. Season 2 ends with an extremely nerve-wracking cliffhanger, and with season 3 and 4 we shift the entirety of the focus onto the relationships of the characters. We see the downfall of some characters we love and the progression of some that we may dislike. These seasons are just downright depressing and miserable, honestly. I feel like the loneliness some characters face in season 2 is just extrapolated, while others just face an insurmountable amount of decline in their moods, and it completely changes their character too. I share the same opinion others have about season 5, it being one of the greatest seasons of television and having such a beautiful stretch of final episodes. With that, I want to say that the rest of this video will have spoilers, so beware. Our main protagonist, Nate Fisher, has this very toxic relationship with a character named Brenda Chenoweth. From start to beginning, the relationship is the definition of rockiness. There are times where they look perfect together and times where they're simply incompatible. They have an intensely passionate relationship, both romantically and verbally. In the first season alone, they probably have more sex than they do compared to the rest of the season. But they also get into a lot of arguments. The arguments aren't always the same though. They range from different topics like relationship dynamics to existential and philosophical beliefs. They're on and off throughout the entirety of the show, but the deep connection they share never falters. They have a bond that ties them together in a way which they become very aware of their behaviors and patterns. It doesn't help that Brenda is a daughter of 2 shrinks, was accredited as a child prodigy, and also was surveyed by psychologists in search of documenting her intelligence. The awareness of their faults was something that tired Nate because there seemed to be a non-authentic side to the relationship that Nate found miserable and repetitive. This was a huge driving force to their separation at the end of the show. During their on and offs, they do go through big character arcs that change them a bit. On the surface, I'd say they definitely do a huge 180 in terms of likability from the beginning to end. Not only in likability, but also what they do to each other. At first, Brenda's really distant but close, and loyal but unloyal. She shifts a lot in search of herself. I can't lie, I strongly hated her during season 2. I don't think I've ever been as irritated as I was watching her cheat on Nate, act like nothing was wrong, and then write fan fiction about it while disguising it as a book that she was working on. I was happy as hell when Nate finally found out about her scandals. But at the end of season 2, Nate gets life-altering news which changes his perspective on both life and death for the rest of the show. This is where he starts to decline in likability, in my opinion, but also becomes a lot more interesting as a protagonist. I think after the sudden news, he fights between two ideas: the desire of death and escaping from death's clutches. I think he's very torn between both ideas, and I think the latter idea is something that is shared much more often than the former, and I totally understand why. There's several events where symbols of death and actions relating to slumber of death genuinely scare him, subconsciously making him do something to quote-unquote feel alive. A more literal presentation of the idea is when Nate fights a man at the bar after finding out Lisa, his wife and mother of his child, Maya, died by implied homicide. He's scared by the death of Lisa, and it makes him think of his own death due to his AVM. So he goes straight to Brenda, who's in the middle of her own relationship that she was able to grow and breathe in by herself. He sabotages her relationship for his own cause and does it to feel alive because it's a major change to his current stage of life. He needs to feel alive, so he chases another woman, even if it's a woman who did harm to him. Another scene was during a double-date camping trip that Nate and Lisa attended. Nate had this feeling of emptiness during the trip and also at the time of the trip because he was having troubles with Lisa. During the trip, there's a snake that appears, and Nate tells everyone to relax and back off while he handles it. He winds up killing it, but he continuously bashes the snake, separating the corpse of each shark. It's an awkward interaction, the other 3 happy campers just watching this man brutally kill this non-poisonous snake, but Nate shoots up with energy after. He was empty and felt dread until he did something that altered the situation and immediately felt better after. This cycle was something he did often, even through the lens of likability in the first and second season. I think Nate was aware of these faults, but he never did anything to change them. It's why with season 5, I knew when Maggie was introduced, he was going to betray Brenda. Except now, Brenda was pregnant with his baby. What made this betrayal so much worse was that Brenda had drastically changed her awful ways. She was a great stepmother to Maya and was incredibly loyal and in love with Nate. She had turned into such a likable character and a person who knew what she needed to do to become a better person. But he did it anyway, and it may have cost him his life. While I do think their relationship was bad, I also felt like they were soulmates. A parallel that I noticed before the show brought light to it was the similarities between Nate and Brenda's relationship to the relationship of Brenda's parents. They were both strongly aware of each other's destructive behaviors and needed to sacrifice things for each other's happiness. And yes, that is something that is necessary for relationships to prosper in general, but there are certain lengths that some parents are not willing to go through to achieve that. I think Nate and Brenda's relationship is an example of those non-sacrificial relationships, while the Chenoweths were examples of relationships willing to sacrifice. If they both were willing to do what was needed to make the relationship work on the emotional side, they would have been a beautiful couple. Watching Dexter beforehand, I was ready to see just how amazing of a performance Michael C. Hall has for this character. From start to finish, I was amazed, honestly. He played this role so perfectly, you can tell he's drawn to these kinds of calm, awkward, and emotionally distant until pissed off kind of characters with the way he plays them. David himself starts off as this closeted homosexual who finds confidence in being himself as the show progresses into the middle of seasons. He's a pretty solid person in all other aspects though. Solid as in literally a rock. He's the backbone of the business, the one who's professional when everyone else is distraught, and the one other characters look up to for help. Something cool I noticed was his affinity for bonding with children. There's symbolism of purity there, and it shows in conflicts and events where he has to make big decisions. Though there are some times where his responsibility for the business is more important. Regardless, once he found his confidence, I never really disliked his character. Everything he did felt human, and the decisions he made weren't really wrong or evil. On the other hand, Keith was a character I was kind of scared about, purely only because of his anger issues in the beginning of the show. I was genuinely scared for big bro David. I had this idea he was going to stay with his abusive boyfriend out of fear, and had to live his life with that fear, but thankfully I was wrong. They were easily the best couple on the show. I loved seeing the scenes they had together, and I adored how much they aimed to be like a normal couple with kids in a big house. They were confidently in love in a time where homosexuality wasn't widely accepted. It showed how resilient they were individually and how much they were serious about each other. Keith's 180 was so good to watch though. I felt like David deserved someone who really made his life easier, and Keith did just that. There were several times where he changed his own decision to make David's life easier, and he never felt sad or disappointed afterwards. He loved David without fault. His love was healing, and that was what David needed after the traumatizing event in Season 4, Episode 5, titled, "That's My Dog." It's essentially an emotionally manipulating journey where David, who already is at a low point, is held captive by this extremely vile thief. Getting robbed at gunpoint by the man you picked up by the side of the street with intention of helping him is a horrible thing. But him holding you captive, where he goes on random rants about his life and forces you to be the victim of those rants, is worse. He constantly lies to David, making the emotionally malleable David believe in those lies, use them as motives, and then confesses that they were just lies. It's an extremely unsettling episode. It was one of the few times where I physically cringed with dread. It's about 15 minutes of just pure anxiety and the throat dry feeling of needing help but never receiving it. This event changed David a lot. It was sort of like how Nate's ABM welcomed the idea of death to his life. David, having been on the brink of death, shudders in fear and becomes intense in emotion when something dangerous is mentioned. He kind of gets over it by the end of the season, but then it comes back to him during the ending of the show in a very imaginative way. To be honest, her character is one that I didn't really like too much at first. I think it was because her self-destructiveness was much more apparent compared to Nate, but I think comparing her to Nate is a great comparison by the end of the show because she kind of becomes what Nate should have become had he done what he needed to do in order to grow. Claire is kind of like this radical feminist who doesn't really know herself and becomes insecure because of it. She approaches art to express herself. In doing so, she gets a lot of praise from counselors and school friends, but only on certain photographs, specifically ones that don't include her. When she does include herself though, there's one student in her college class that makes the comment that the girl in the photo is looking at life through the lens of being unbounded by human constructs. It doesn't mean much to her, but I think as she fails to find new ideas, there is truth in what the student says. There's a big breakthrough in her career where she finds a style to her art that separates her from her peers and gives that real, authentic sense of self to her art. But she doesn't really like the style too much after she gets her first show. She doesn't even know what the art meant to her when she created the style. I think it's because there truly is no meaning to it in her eyes. She appreciates pictures of environmental beauty and pictures of herself because it aligns with what she's trying to find. I honestly believe that the style of art that gave her her first show was merely a style of art and nothing more. It was a way to give herself some fame, but the style wasn't her. The cycle she faces throughout the show is a cycle of horrible, psychopathic boyfriends. All of her exes either used her, disrespected her, or straight up did not love and appreciate her the way that she wanted to be. Not only that, but a few of them were literally crazy people. She needed someone who could make her feel safe and secure in her chaotic life. She was either always bitter or always angry to certain people, and I think she started to realize that later down the season. So when she got a corporate job, I think I knew that this was going to be the place that she would find someone who could actually make her feel safe. Not only did she find someone who could do that, but she found confidence working there. You could tell with her constant change of clothes, where she tried on different styles and colors to express herself and really own professional clothing. Seeing her happy with the man she met was beautiful, as she really was such a tragic character. Who knew you'd find the love of your life at an office job? The ending to this show is probably one of the best endings in all of television. The closure that this show gives while also piercing your heart enough to make you bawl with emotions is just unmatched. After Nate cheats on a pregnant Brenda, he suffers a fatal stroke that leaves him bedridden. He wakes up from a coma and gets to talk with his family. They come in at separate times, all individually apart from the Fisher children, and it feels so deceitful and investigative. Like you know something is going to happen, but you don't want it to. At night, David and Nate are watching a documentary that is showing some birds diving into the deep blue ocean. It transports us into this dream world where Nate meets with an alternate version of David. They're being driven by their late father and get lost by the ocean. Nate jumps out, stares into it, and shouts that he's going in. David doesn't follow, and we watch Nate dive into the ocean without a trace of his body appearing in the waves. We then flip back to David, except it's the David we know, and we get sent back to the real world. The sound of a ringing digital synth echoes, and we see Nate's lifeless eyes. It's such a sad death, not only because it's the death of our protagonist, but also because of the fact he dies so suddenly. How he acts in the dream sequence and after the sequence is the reason why I say, while alive, he's in the middle of not knowing whether he wants to die or stay alive. He welcomes death in the dream and isn't sad as a ghost. In fact, he seems relatively happy. It's a very beautiful conclusion to a very complex character. The next episode has this smog of depression and loneliness marking around, while the ending clears the smoke and allows for hope. I like how it gives viewers some time to really recognize and feel what they just witnessed. The ending of the show itself is melancholic, bittersweet, and is blissfully mournful. Seeing how these people grow and watching as they die right after each other is the sickest shit ever. The show writers are absolute evil fuckers for this beautiful ending, honestly. I think the saddest one was seeing David's reaction to Keith before he passed. He wore a red shirt, which was the same color of the hooded man who represented death in David's imaginations. David seeing a young Keith, knowing that he's waiting for him, genuinely had my eyes watering. The transition from each death to Curry and Claire driving through the barren desert with Sia's beautiful backing vocals, there's acceptance in this ending, accepting the path that's laid out for each character and heading towards it without remorse. There's so much more to this show that I haven't spoken about, and a lot of things that I have more to say about, like the symbolism of Nate as a bird and his affinity to the ocean, or Ruth's character, or the visions of Ghost, and how they are important to the character's current identity. However, I definitely do more videos on this show depending on how this video performs. I know there aren't too many videos on this show, so I'd love to add more to the small library of 6 feet under. If you want to check out some more videos though, I'd definitely recommend Nicole. She has very informative analytical videos from a psychological perspective, and the vids are great overall. Peeling back the layers of this show is fun, eye-opening, and tear-jerking. The main thing I appreciate about this show is like how I mentioned earlier. These characters feel like real humans. Even if they continue making the same mistakes or repeating the same behaviors, some change their decisions and some don't. Some want to grow and be better and others don't. I love this show, and before I say any more, this show is definitely Sriracha certified. Also, before I go, I do want to shout out this channel. I'm kind of going off script here, so you're kind of just hearing me ramble for this segment. Big, huge shout out to DuckBreaks. I loved being on his video, being on set with him, and seeing how he operates was amazing. This guy is literally an inspiration of mine, and literally is the reason why I honestly started this channel. Like, genuinely is the reason why I started this channel. So please watch this video. I am in this video with him. We just answered some great questions that he had about art and the future of art, and yeah, I had a great time, and being with him on this video was definitely a blessing and a gift. So yes, please please visit him. Huge shout out to him, and yeah. Anyways, thank you guys for making it this far into the video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.